Hello, I'm Sarah Arnold, and we'll be looking at cognitive perspectives today, along with the processing of information from Chapter 6. This includes the principles of learning. Basic assumptions of information processing are that 1. The human memory is an active and organized system which processes information. In other words, it's actively involved in the construction of knowledge. And 2. A person's prior knowledge plays an important role in learning. There are 3 beliefs about this. 1 regarding the nature of human memory system, which is a complex system. It does not passively record information, but instead it actively seeks the sensory data that is to be processed and changes it into meaningful information, often storing it to be used later. Second, beliefs deal with the way that specific knowledge items are represented in the long-term memory. And the third belief goes with the organization of bodies of knowledge in the long-term memory. There are 6 conceptualizations of the nature of human memory. 3 of them are based on states or levels, and the other 3 are based on the memory system operation. The 3 based on levels are the state concept, memory system concept, and the levels of processing. The state concept conceptualizes memory in terms of the state of information such as active or inactive. Examples include memorizing a poem or telephone number or talking with a friend while driving. However, it does not address the processing steps in acquiring information. Memory system concept has 3 types. Episodic memory is personal or autobiographical information which allows one to mentally travel back into his or her past and re-experience personal events. Semantic memory is more general knowledge, such as word meanings and facts. Procedural memory is the steps that assist in adaptively responding to one's environment. However, the differences in processing between semantic and procedural memories are not clear. Now we have the levels of processing. A memory is considered a byproduct of perceptual analysis in a series of sequential hierarchical levels. Examples include the types of processing involved in pattern recognition, sensory analysis, and semantic association, such as identifying words or phrases. However, the depth of processing cannot be measured separately from the amount of information that is remembered because it does not address more complex processes. The 3 conceptualizations of the nature of human memory based on the memory system operation are the connectionist perspective, multi-stage model, and global workspace concept. Connectionist perspectives, or networks, require processing information from several sources at once, and it's made up of nodes or element links, or connection weights, in a network structure based on the interacting connection nets. It's also described as a frisbee or rubber band model. However, this model does not account for autonomous learning because it requires a physical agent to alter the connection, nor is there a guarantee that it's an equal representation of the brain's network. Multi-stage model. Information is processed in stages linked to memory systems, and there are structures such as the working memory and the long-term memory, but they are not locations or bins in the brain. However, there's a lack of research confirming the capacity of structures, and it does not take into account the variations in brain function. Finally, we have the global workspace concept. It deals mostly with human consciousness and assumes that adaptive networks of the brain are controlled by particular contexts and aims. If you turn to page 194 of your textbook and look at figure 6.2, you see that it describes the global workspace concept in terms of a theater, and it's based on the components of Bayer's theater metaphor of consciousness, of which the components are listed on the slide. However, this concept does not address the actual working of neuronal networks. When looking at the representations of knowledge, one needs to keep in mind that physical signals or stimulus input is received and transformed for long-term memory storage. There are 2 views which go along with this concept, the dual code model and the verbal perspective. The dual code model includes both verbal storage or codes and nonverbal codes. The verbal storage are things such as abstract objects, including the concept of soul, truth, ability, and success, whereas nonverbal codes are representations such as environmental sounds or actions and other non-linguistic objects or events. Some things may be stored in only one of those, or other things might be stored in both, such as the word key, because it can be a physical object to unlock the door, or a concept such as the key to success. The verbal perspective. Declarative knowledge is information that can be declared or discussed and is descriptive. It's stored as propositional networks. Examples include has hair, is a herbivore, or the dog has 4 legs, as shown in the photograph on this slide. The procedural knowledge is knowing how to complete a particular task or activity. It is stored as if-then statements or condition-action pairs. An example is making a sandwich, as shown in the photograph on this slide. Now we will move on to the organizations of knowledge. Tacit knowledge functions below the level of conscious awareness. It's implicit. An example is sociocultural knowledge of what attire is appropriate for church services. Explicit knowledge is readily available to consciousness and is the object of thought and has 2 broad categories, metacognitive and conceptual. Metacognitive is information about specific and general strategies for learning new information or specific tasks. Conceptual knowledge is content knowledge, like acquiring concepts or developing specific domain knowledge. Next, we have schemas. They are a vague concept, and according to Gredler in 1998, Neath defined schema as an organized structure that reflects an individual's knowledge, experience, and expectations about some aspect of the world. There are 3 functions of schema, which are 1. Provide a framework to assist in comprehending new information. 2. Serve as a guide for goal-directed activities and searches of the environment. 3. Fill in gaps in information received from the environment. Although schemas do aid in recall, there can be errors, such as the example found on page 200 of your textbook. Other limitations of schema include not knowing how much information should be included and how much should be optional. The learning framework has 2 major components, which are the framework and the process. The role of the learner knowledge, such as prior knowledge, includes the extent and the variety, because it influences all aspects of the processing in the learning situation. Tacit and content knowledge base serves as the framework for identifying incoming information and are major determinants of the inferences that individuals make about new information, along with having an extensive knowledge base, because that enhances the short-term memory capacity due to the chunking of new information into larger units. The organization of the information to be learned has 2 formal structures, which are the teacher presentations and text passages. Perception is the selecting and recognizing physical signals which are impinging on the senses, including the iconic memory, which refers to the visual images, and the echoic memory, which refers to the auditory. Here, the role of attention includes a limited capacity of attention, so one can practice some essential tasks until they become automatic. But before it becomes automatic, one must focus, which requires deliberate or controlled processing. Here, the learner knowledge plays an important role in perception as well. Encoding and constructing meaning is when information is coded and stored in the long-term memory for later retrieval. It's important to keep in mind that the more ways a learner encodes information, the greater the chance of retrieval later. Encoding specific items includes 2 types of encoding strategies: primary rehearsal, which is simple repetition, and elaborative rehearsal, which modifies the information, replaces it with a symbol, or supplements it with other prior knowledge. Examples include mnemonics, and more specifically, the method of loci, which is when one uses the reference of the physical location to aid in memory recall. Like when students taking the math STAR test and the students look at the classroom's bare walls and looking at a particular area of the classroom, for example, where the math vocabulary word wall was, helps them to recall the information that the teacher had displayed there. Encoding concepts, principles, and ideas. There are 2 methods for encoding content knowledge: reviews of the materials or additional presentations of the materials at a later time, and Whitrock's generative learning model, which deals with the relationships among concepts and the relationships between the new information and prior knowledge. Finally, retrieval is concerned with the recall of information from the long-term memory. According to Gredler, Tulving says it's important to note that memory storage can be successful even if retrieval is not, due to a lack of a retrieval queue.